Yeah. So I would say, as a starting point, that the world that we live in with nuclear weapons, I would say hasn't changed very much because of the repeated nuclear threats that we've seen from Vladimir Putin. And I think that oftentimes a lot of people forget that we live in the world of nuclear deterrence, where security is believed to be provided by states by aiming nuclear weapons at population centers in other countries. And I think that what's really interesting is that after the end of the Cold War, a lot of people in the public lost sight of nuclear weapons and the nuclear issue. There wasn't really a need to talk about it. And so, what I think Vladimir Putin has done with the constant rhetoric that we've seen in the context of Ukraine is kind of reminded the public of the scary bits and pieces of the nuclear world that we live in that I think that a lot of people have forgotten about. What Putin has done essentially is, I would say, said the scary parts of nuclear deterrence out loud. And
Right.
Ukraine is really quite a fascinating case because I talk a lot with Russian colleagues in track two dialogues and other forum, and I ask them about this, about Vladimir Putin's threats and everything. And interestingly enough, the response that I get from my Russian colleagues frequently is, have you seen Putin specifically say, if you do this, I will do this? And so my Russian colleagues actually, in general, believe that Putin has not made any nuclear threats whatsoever, which is really quite fascinating. Um, and so we have this kind of legacy as far as nuclear weapons and nuclear threats go, where researchers have cataloged since 1945, like what is a nuclear threat? How many of them have happened? And depending on who you talk to, we've seen well more than 100 nuclear threats. So what Putin is doing, again, isn't new. I think is designed to um, scare Western countries out of direct
Right.
intervention in Ukraine. But it's really quite interesting as far as red lines go, I would say. And that is, some people thought that supplying Ukraine with conventional weapons might be a red line, that maybe training Ukrainian soldiers, that intelligence sharing, that providing Leopard tanks would be a red line. And we haven't really seen that yet. And it is kind of scary, though, if you have all these ambiguous red lines and Putin's threats or views on nuclear weapons aren't seen to be credible, because then you keep going and going and going, and then maybe potentially you have a problem, because if nuclear threats aren't seen as credible, there's a really great way to restore credibility to nuclear threats, and that is to use nuclear weapons, sadly enough. But I think it's highly unlikely that nuclear weapons would be used in the context of the war in Ukraine. And I think that this has gotten a lot of attention, of course, with the deployments to Belarus. What's really quite fascinating about this is the United States has, for a long time, maintained tactical nuclear weapons in European countries, in Germany, and Belgium, and Turkey, and Italy, and the Netherlands. And interestingly enough, for a number of years, Russia has legally objected to those and said that under the clauses of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, this shouldn't be permitted for this nuclear armed state to share its nuclear weapons with others.
Right.
Now, it seems to be in the interest of Russian security. Russia seems willing to reinterpret the law and do this. And I think that, you pointed out, Armin, I think it's true that there is a lot of fear about the potential use of tactical nuclear weapons, because we're talking about moving these low yield nuclear weapons right into Belarus, which has been a staging point for a lot of Russian offensive operations. And so I think it's important to think about, what are these tactical nuclear weapons? What are we dealing with? What, might happen if they were used? What are the scenarios? And right, tactical nuclear weapons are, nuclear weapons which are designed for use on the battlefield. If
Hmm.
there's a conventional conflict between sides, they're supposed to tip the balance in one state's favor by using them. And they're seen as being kind of lower yield nuclear weapons. So there's this belief that they may be more usable. And what's actually kind of scary is that the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, for example, was 14 kilotons, right? 14,000 metric tons of TNT. Whereas some of the tactical nuclear weapons today have much smaller yields, but some are actually larger than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. So there could be quite catastrophic effects. But what's interesting when you think about it is, like, what would the scenario be for Russia to use tactical nuclear weapons on the battlefield? And if you look at Ukrainian forces operating in theater, the tactical nuclear weapons are most usable when you see like giant clusters of forces which pose easy military targets. These are mobile operations. We're not seeing that from the Ukrainian side. There aren't things that would be a lot of great targets for tactical nuclear weapons. Interestingly enough, too, if you think about it, if Russia wants to take and hold territory, that means that if it's going to use tactical nuclear weapons on the battlefield, it's going to have to potentially march its troops in theater through areas where tactical nuclear weapons have been used, which is also really complicated scenario. And a lot of the Russian soldiers who have been drafted are believed to not have proper training in essentially working in a battlefield where chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear weapons have been used. And it is also believed that they don't have all of them don't have proper personal protective equipment. So what I think about when I see this is, yes, I think that having Russian tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus is scary. But if you go back in time historically, there were changes in place foreshadowing the deployment of Russian tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine on February 24th, 2022. So I don't think they're I don't think they're as usable as people think. I think that they're perhaps a show of Russia's seriousness and Russia's intentions. And also, too, they're going to be controlled by Russian troops, Russian forces. Belarus isn't going to have the autonomous ability to use tactical nuclear weapons, despite some of the comments that Lukashenko has made about, oh, come join us, everybody can have tactical nuclear weapons, which are not very judicious comments. Right. So I guess, to really come down on it, I don't really see a scenario for tactical nuclear weapons to be used in Ukraine, because I think that even though things are not going well for Russia in the war, I think that Russia is very capable of destroying targets that it wants to destroy with conventional weapons. And I don't see what the unique military utility is attached to these tactical nuclear weapons.